He did it at 2:47 in the morning. That is the detail that matters. Not the city, not the hotel, not the season or the competition or the specific weight of what had happened that week. What matters is the time. 2:47 in the morning, when the last member of his staff had gone to sleep and the security detail was stationed outside in the corridor, and the room was as quiet as rooms get when you are the most famous athlete on the planet, and silence has become the rarest luxury you possess. He picked up his phone. He opened the browser. And Cristiano Ronaldo typed his own name into the search bar. He had told himself he would not do it. He had been told by managers and psychologists and people who understood the particular damage that public opinion can do to a competitor's internal world, never to do it. He knew better. He had known better for 20 years. And at 2:47 in the morning, alone in a hotel room in a city that was sleeping without him, he did it anyway. What came up on that screen, the headlines, the articles, the comment sections, the takes and countertakes, and the slow accumulated weight of a world in the process of deciding that it was done with you, broke something open in him that he had spent his entire career keeping sealed. But here is what nobody knew about that night. Here is the part that changes everything. Because what Cristiano Ronaldo found when he searched his own name was not what he expected, and it was worse. He had expected criticism. He had built his entire career inside criticism, had metabolized it, and transformed it into fuel with such consistency that the process had become automatic, unconscious, as natural as breathing. The people who said he was arrogant. The people who said his goals were empty statistics in weak leagues. The people who said he was a product of marketing rather than genuine greatness, a carefully constructed image rather than a real footballer. He had heard all of it. He had heard it so many times that the individual voices had blurred into a kind of background radiation, always present, never quite reaching him. What he had not expected was the quiet ones. Not the critics, the mourners. Because scattered between the attack pieces and the statistical breakdowns and the hot takes generated for clicks, there were articles written by people who had loved him. Really loved him. The way football fans love the players who define the years when football mattered most to them, who are woven into specific memories of specific evenings, who exist not just as athletes but as a kind of emotional landmark. And these people were writing about Ronaldo in the past tense. Not cruelly. That was the thing that undid him. Not with malice or satisfaction or the particular relish of someone who has been waiting for a fall. With sadness. With the gentle, slightly mournful tone of someone describing something that used to exist and no longer quite does. They were writing about him the way people write about things they miss. He was still playing. He was still scoring. He was still there. And they were already mourning him. Now here is what that feels like, and why it matters more than any criticism ever could. Criticism, Ronaldo understood. Criticism had a shape he recognized, a logic he could engage with, a momentum he knew how to reverse. Criticism said, "You are not good enough." And to that, he had always had an answer. Not in words, but in work, in the next training session, in the next match, in the next goal scored, in the next crucial moment. Criticism was a wall you could run at. You could break through it, or you could fail trying, but either way there was something to push against. Nostalgia had no wall. Nostalgia said, "You are magnificent, and it is over, and we are grateful." It offered no target. It asked for no response. It simply arrived, gentle and devastating, and sat there in the blue light of a phone screen at 2:47 in the morning and refused to be argued with. He scrolled for longer than he should have. He read things he should not have read. An article by a journalist who had covered his entire career, someone who had been in the press box for his debut, who had written about his first Champions League, who had documented the Ballon d'Or years with a kind of careful, serious attention that good sports journalism brings to its best subjects. And this journalist was now writing, with evident affection and evident sadness, about what Ronaldo's legacy would look like when the playing was finally done.
When?
Not if.
When?
He put the phone face down on the bed. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and he felt something he had not felt since he was a child in Madeira, being sent away from everything he knew to chase something he could not yet fully imagine. He felt small. Not in the way that failure makes you feel small. He had experienced failure, had been through enough of it to know its specific texture. This was different. This was the smallness of irrelevance. of being in the process of becoming a footnote in your own story. And Cristiano Ronaldo, who had spent 30 years being the largest presence in every room he entered, did not know what to do with that feeling. But here is what happened next, and almost nobody knows this part. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark for a while. Then he got up, put on training clothes, and went down to the hotel gym at 3 in the morning. Not because he had a plan. Not because he had made a decision or reached a conclusion, or found the motivational fuel that his public image would have required him to find in that moment. He went because movement was the only thing he knew how to do when the inside of his head became too loud to stay still inside. The gym was empty. Of course it was. The kind of hotel that houses elite football squads has a gym available at all hours, but at 3 in the morning it belongs to no one. Just equipment and mirrors and the particular flat silence of a room designed for effort, but temporarily at rest. He turned on half the lights, sat on a bench for a moment. Then he started. He did not train with intensity. That was not what this was. He moved slowly, almost meditatively, basic movements, the kind of physical repetition that clears the mind rather than challenges the body. Stretching, light footwork. The kinds of exercises he had been doing since he was 12 years old, so deeply embedded in muscle memory that they required nothing from the conscious mind, leaving it free to do what it needed to do. And what his mind did in that empty gym at 3 in the morning was go back. Here is where the story turns, because what Ronaldo found when he went back was not what he was looking for. He went back to Madeira first. To the house with 4 children in one room, and the sound of his mother leaving early in the morning before the sun came up to clean houses that belonged to other people. To the neighborhood where football was not a career path or a dream, but simply what you did, the thing that existed between school and dinner, and the specific boredom of growing up somewhere that the rest of the world had no particular reason to notice. He went back to the feeling of a ball at his feet on a concrete pitch, the sun going down, everyone else having gone home, and him still there, still going. Not because someone was watching, because he could not stop that he had forgotten that. Not intellectually, he spoke about his origins in interviews with practiced fluency, had narrated his own story so many times that certain phrases had become almost ceremonial. But he had forgotten it in the body, forgotten the purity of it. The way football had felt before it became a career, before it became a brand, before it became a debate and a legacy, and a number on a list of all-time scorers, and a subject for articles written in the gentle past tense by people who loved him. It had just been a feeling once, a physical sensation of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly the thing he was supposed to do, and the whole complicated world contracting to the size of a ball and a pitch and the next move. When had he last felt that? He stopped moving, stood in the center of the empty gym, breathing slightly harder than the exertion warranted, and sat with that question in a way he had not sat with anything in a very long time. And this is the part that nobody who writes about Cristiano Ronaldo ever quite captures, the part that lives underneath the records and the image and the decades of carefully performed invulnerability. He was tired. Not physically. Physical tiredness was something he understood and managed with the precision of an engineer. He was tired in the way that people get tired when they have been performing for a very long time. When the gap between who you are in public and who you are in private has been maintained for so many years that you can no longer quite remember which one came first. When success has given you everything it promised and the one thing it did not promise, relief, rest, the feeling of having finally arrived somewhere permanent, turns out to be the one thing you needed most. He had been running towards something his entire life. Away from Madeira, away from poverty, away from the kid with the island accent who cried himself to sleep in the academy dormitory. Toward the next trophy, the next record, the next proof. He had been running so long and so fast that he had never quite stopped to ask what happened when you got there. What happened when you had everything you had run toward, and it turned out that getting there did not stop the running. The running just continued because running was all you knew how to do, because stopping, even briefly, even in an empty gym at 3 in the morning, felt like the beginning of the end. He sat down on the gym floor. Just sat there, back against the mirrored wall, knees drawn up, in the posture of a person who has stopped performing even for themselves. And he asked himself a question he had never asked before. Not in 30 years of professional football. Not in the interviews or the documentaries or the long internal conversations that every competitive person has with themselves in the spaces between public life. Never in all of it had he asked this. What would you do if nobody was watching? Here is what that question cracked open, and why the answer surprised even him. The honest answer, the one that arrived not as a thought but as a physical sensation, a kind of warmth in the chest that he recognized only because it had been absent for so long, was this. Exactly this. The empty gym. The basic movements. The ball. Somewhere in his imagination, at his feet on a concrete pitch in Madeira, with the sun going down. Football stripped of everything that had accumulated around it over 30 years. The contracts, the cameras, the comparisons, the legacy, the terrifying and relentless requirement to be the greatest person on any given pitch on any given day.
Just the game.
Just the feeling. He had not let himself want it that simply in years. The competitive machinery of his life had been running at such volume for so long that the original signal, the simple, unmediated love of football that had put him on that concrete pitch at 12 years old and kept him there after everyone else had gone home, had been almost completely drowned out. Not gone, just buried, under the noise of everything that the love of football had produced. He stayed on the gym floor for a long time. He did not make any decisions. He did not reach any conclusions that he then executed with the clean efficiency that his public life suggested he brought to everything. He just sat with it. The tiredness and the fear and the question and, underneath all of it, the thing he had almost lost contact with entirely. The reason he had started. What happened in the weeks that followed was not a transformation. Real changes are not transformations. That word belongs to stories, to the clean arc of before and after. Real changes are slower and less visible and more fragile than that. He trained differently. Not harder. His staff would have noticed harder, and several of them had been quietly, carefully monitoring him for signs of the kind of obsessive overtraining that elite athletes sometimes fall into when fear drives the work instead of love. He trained with a different quality of attention. More present. Less driven by the image on the screen of what his numbers needed to look like. He made a small adjustment to his morning routine, arrived at the training pitch 10 minutes earlier than scheduled, before the staff, before the cameras, before the day began in its official form, and he just kicked a ball around. Alone.
No drill.
No structure. No purpose beyond the sensation of it. His closest teammates noticed something had shifted. They could not have said what. His mood was not dramatically different. His output in sessions was consistent. But there was something in the quality of his attention on the pitch that felt different. Less like a man under pressure proving something, and more like a man simply doing what he loves. It was a subtle distinction, but the people who had played alongside him for years felt it. And then came the match. Nobody in that stadium knew what had happened 3 weeks earlier in a hotel gym at 3 a.m. Nobody knew about the phone screen and the articles written in the gentle past tense and the question he had asked himself on the floor with his back against the mirror. They saw what they always saw. Cristiano Ronaldo walking out of the tunnel, jaw set, expression controlled, the performance of certainty so complete that it left no room for doubt. But something was different. He felt it from the first minute. A looseness. A quality of ease that he had not brought to a match in longer than he could precisely remember. Not the ease of arrogance. He knew that feeling, had worn it when he was young and the world had not yet found the edges of what he could do. This was different. This was the ease of someone who has stopped needing the outcome to be a certain thing and has returned to simply playing. He scored in the 33rd minute. A movement he had not premeditated, a turn and a strike that arrived from instinct rather than calculation, from the body doing what it knows before the mind has finished deciding. The ball hit the net, and he stood there for a moment before the celebration arrived, just stood in the brief stillness of it, and something passed across his face that the cameras caught but none of the analysts quite knew how to describe. It looked, one journalist wrote the next morning, almost like relief. Like a man remembering something he had been afraid he had forgotten. He scored again in the 67th minute. Different kind of goal, patient, technical, the product of movement built over several seconds, reading the space, arriving at exactly the right moment. The stadium rose. His teammates ran to him. He let them come, let the noise wash over him, and in the middle of it all he felt something he had not felt in the longest time. Not vindication. Not relief. Not the familiar cold satisfaction of proving the doubters wrong.
Just joy.
Simple, uncomplicated, almost childlike joy. The feeling of a ball struck right on a pitch in front of people who were watching, and the whole world for one moment contracting to exactly that size. He did not tell anyone about the hotel room, about 2:47 in the morning and the search bar and the articles written in the past tense, about the gym floor and the question and the thing he had found underneath all the noise. He did not make it into a story, not for the press, not for a documentary, not for the carefully managed moments of apparent vulnerability that his public life occasionally permitted. He kept it, the way he kept the things that were real. He did not tell anyone about the hotel room, about 2:47 in the morning and the search bar and the articles written in the past tense, about the gym floor and the question and the thing he had found underneath all the noise. He did not make it into a story, not for the press, not for a documentary, not for the carefully managed moments of apparent vulnerability that his public life occasionally permitted. He kept it, the way he kept the things that were real. There was one moment about a week after the match that came close to breaking the seal. A young journalist, barely 25, clearly nervous, clearly aware that he was being given more access than his experience probably warranted, asked him in a post-training interview whether there were moments when he doubted himself. A standard question, the kind that gets asked in every profile piece, that has a standard answer that he had given 100 times with minor variations. He opened his mouth to give it again, and then he stopped. Not for long. A second, maybe two. Long enough for the journalist to notice, long enough for the camera operator to hold the shot, long enough for something to pass across his face that was not the performance, and was not the answer, and was not anything that belonged to the version of himself he had been maintaining in public for 30 years. Then the answer came. Controlled. Confident. The practiced fluency of a man who knows exactly what he is willing to say and exactly where the line is. The journalist nodded and moved on to the next question. But later, watching the footage back, one of his longtime staff members paused on that 2-second moment, watched it 3 times, said nothing to anyone, but felt, with the particular intuition of someone who has spent years reading a person they care about, that something had shifted, that something had happened that they were not going to be told about, and that whatever it was, it had been necessary. But the night after the match, alone again in his room, he picked up his phone. Not to search his name, he would not do that again. He picked it up and he opened a different app. Old footage. His own from years ago, not the highlight reels that circulated online, but raw training footage, the kind that never gets published. Himself at 19, at 22, at 25. Moving with the specific quality of someone who has not yet learned to be afraid of what the world thinks of their movement. He watched for a while. Then he put the phone down. Outside, the city was dark and quiet. Somewhere in it, people were sleeping, and some of them were dreaming about football, and some of them, the ones for whom football was woven into the most important memories of their lives, were dreaming without knowing it about him. About a goal he scored in a year they would always remember. About a moment when the ball went in, and something lifted.
He did not know this.
He could not know this. But in the silence of his room, in the particular peace of someone who has found something they had almost lost, Cristiano Ronaldo lay down and closed his eyes. The fear was not gone. Fear like that does not go. But it had changed its shape, from a wall he was running toward into something smaller, something he could carry without it carrying him. Tomorrow there would be training. There would be cameras and questions, and the machinery of his public life grinding back into motion. There would be another match and another performance and another morning of headlines that he would not read. But tonight, in the dark, he was just a man who still loved the game. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt like enough.